Over the last year, Bungie has been making changes to our kinetic weapons to make them more worthwhile to use, which they definitely needed, since there wasn't really much of a point in using them over stasis weapons back in the day. With the launch of Lightfall though, Bungie scaled stasis weapon back to no longer have that 5% damage bonus versus unshielded targets in PvE, as well as giving kinetic damage weapons a decent buff by increasing their damage multiplier. Some folks seem to forget this, but kinetic primary ammo weapons were increased from a 1.05 multiplier to 1.1, and kinetic special ammo weapons were increased from a 1.05 multiplier to a 1.15 multiplier, as well as depending on if you're in an activity that has surge active, and if your subclass is matching the surge, this too will grant your kinetic weapons an additional 25% damage bonus. Now, a new perk was also introduced around this time, exclusive to kinetic weapons, which is the focus of today's video, Kinetic Tremors. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering why we're making a dedicated video on this perk nearly 3 seasons later. Well, the answer is simple. Next season, it's looking to receive some very nice changes, essentially making Kinetic Tremors even better. On top of all this, earlier this year on June the 15th, during a TWAB, we got a Q&A regarding sandbox questions, and there was one interesting question asked that we have to share with you. The question was, kinetic weapons seems to be falling behind as builds get more intricate. Are there any plans or ideas to make them more interesting to help integrate them into builds? Bungie replied, we've also noticed this. We've poked at the issues a little with the damage increase versus unshielded enemies and the Kinetic Tremors perk, but we've also prioritized shipping more strand and stasis weapons in the kinetic slot to equalize those numbers a little and ensure that all slots can tie into build crafting. We're continuing to look at kinetic and have something planned in a year of the final shape timeline that may make them a little more unique. But maybe it's time for that kinetic subclass? Now, this could be complete copium to say that kinetic weapons could be the meta in the near future. Bungie's already publicly come out and said that next week they're going to be going over all the stasis changes, which is making us speculate whether or not next season is going to be very stasis heavy in regards to the meta. With that being said though, Bungie is aware of the discrepancy between kinetic and energy type weapons. But keep in mind, in the year of the final shape timeline, that's a pretty widespread. It's like saying, hey, you're going to get LFG in Lightfall. Anybody see LFG yet? Look, I know we're going to get it. I'm just saying it's still going to be a bit before we get it. Now, whether or not we get a kinetic subclass down the road or something that ties into our kinetic weapons or whatever other various buffs Bungie may give to kinetic weapons, regardless though, where we are now, Kinetic Tremors is one of the best perks you can have on your kinetic weapon. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the changes that are coming to this perk. We're also going to look at some of the hypothetical numbers for next season and give you a rundown of the weapons you need to be keeping with Kinetic Tremors. Now, I'm sure most people watching already know what Kinetic Tremors does, but for those who don't, the perk reads, sustained kinetic damage to a target amidst a shockwave that damages any nearby targets. Now, to activate the perk, you need to score the amount of hits necessary versus your target within 3 seconds of each other, which will emit 3 shock waves of damage. Now, it's different for every weapon. For submachine guns, it's 14 hits. Pulse rifles and sidearms, it's 12 hits. Handguns and scout rifles, it's 6 hits. And for sniper rifles, it's 3. It's a fun perk. Granted, for certain weapons, not necessarily the most meta perk, especially in comparison to energy counterparts. I'm sure when it comes to like clearing out ads, most people like incandescent or volt shots or even destabilizing rounds. Personally, I think it's that perfect middle ground, right? Where it does a good job clearing ads, but mainly it's able to do sustained damage against meteor targets. Now, what's changing next season? Detailed in Bungie's Season 23 weapons preview blog post, they wanted to make the activation requirements more consistent across archetypes. So they're changing the amount of hits needed to trigger on some weapons. For pulse rifles, for the base perk, they reduce shots required or bullets landed from 12 to 11. Enhance actually is going up. So Enhance is getting worse here from 9 to 10. Non-burst sidearms, for example, Buzzard, the common trait is being reduced from 12 to 8. That is a substantial improvement. Now the Enhance is going from 9 to 7. So all around net buffs here. Now out of all these changes, the one I'm most excited for is for sidearms. Look, I'm not saying that Buzzard's going to be the meta, but going from 12 to now 8 at base and then 9 to 7 at Enhance for potential future sidearms, that's huge. And this has been one of the main things holding Buzzard back, outside of course being a sidearm. It's those shots needed to activate. Considering it only has 16 bullets in a magazine, you're left with only 4 shots after getting that Kinetic Tremor to proc. And that's if you land the 12 shots needed to begin with. Now we looked at some of the Kinetic Tremor damage values previously in our showrunner review, as we wanted to compare some of the top options. We're going to be revisiting that list with some additional weapons included. Currently, there are 11 unique weapons that can roll with Kinetic Tremors, and 3 of those are craftable. We have spare rations, battle scar, Shattering Bone, which is craftable, the Messenger, Hung Jury, Nameless Midnight, Randy's Throwing Knife, Transfiguration, which is craftable, Buzzard, the Supremacy, which is also craftable, and Showrunner. Now, I know this is a lot of numbers on the screen here. We're gonna break some of these down though a little bit further. Let's start with Buzzard though, as this is the one I'm most excited to be using. The biggest issue with Buzzard right now is that it just takes too many shots to proc Kinetic Tremors, and it doesn't have the ammo economy to justify using it. That's all gonna be changing next season. Now, these changes aren't necessarily changing your DPS per se, since there's no actual increase to the damage that Kinetic Tremors is outputting, but it's worth noting that Buzzard does have the highest individual Kinetic Tremor damage and the highest DPS amongst these weapons, outside of course Supremacy. But what will be changing is your total damage. More importantly, your forgiveness. Theoretically, next season, Buzzard should be outputting 159,834 damage per mag with Kinetic Tremors, which will now be able to proc twice per base magazine. Now keep in mind, unless you have a mag perk or something actually boosting your mag size, this is going to require you to be 100% accurate. There's also going to be a 2-second delay before you can proc Kinetic Tremors again. So you very well could just reload instead of waiting to shoot again. Where you're really going to be noticing this difference though is when it just comes to proccing it that first time. And of course, perks that grant you more ammo, whether that be 4 times the charm or the combination. I wish I had that being Overflow and Kinetic Tremors. Now sadly, Buzzard is leaving the Nightfall rotation, and if you miss the week of October the 17th, well then FOMO's about to set in. But you can focus for the non-adept version still at Zavala, and you could do that even next season. It'll be available for legacy focusing. So if you don't care about it being adept, you can just focus one right now, guys. And actually, it'll be slightly cheaper than the legacy focusing price next season. And again, I'm not saying Buzzard is going to define the meta, but it is one of those that I'm going to keep in my vault just in case it puts out. Kinetic Tremors proccing more often on it, it's going to put out even more. Next up, I want to take a look at pulse rifles, more specifically Shattering Bone with enhanced Kinetic Tremors and Battle Scar with the base Kinetic Tremors. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the Messenger with Kinetic Tremors, but to be quite honest with you, I'm not that crazy about high impacts inside of PvE. Next season, the difference between base and enhance is only going to be by 1 shot. So in my opinion, it's not really going to be worth enhancing. Now, yes, your total damage per mag is going to be higher, as you can pull off 3 Kinetic Tremor procs per mag, but like I mentioned before, you would have to wait for that activation delay to be over, and the only perk that can feed us ammo here on Shattering Bone is Discord. With that being said, there's no perk here on Battle Scar that produces ammo either, at least not with the ease of use that I would love to see. Granted, what are the chances Bungie gives us a triple tap Kinetic Tremor pulse rifle? It's just not gonna happen, but I still think Kinetic Tremors is gonna be great on pulse rifles. It deals solid DPS, and the total damage, although it is lacking behind things like Buzzard and Showrunner, it's still good. Now do keep in mind, we're receiving a buff to pulse rifle damage inside of PvE, 12.5% to be exact, against red and orange bars. All of this testing, we actually didn't even factor in that 12.5% increase in damage. Again, we're gonna be testing this extensively next season, but pulse rifles actually look pretty good. And no lie, Battle Scar with a mag perk plus shoot to loot and Kinetic Tremors in combination with Field Tested would be my go-to pulse rifle, even over Shattering Bone. Now the last weapon I want to look at is Supremacy. Now there isn't any changes directly coming to Kinetic Tremors for sniper rifles next season, but sniper rifles are getting a significant buff. Matter of fact, we just covered that 15% buff, and this is going to affect everything. Whisper the Worm, Darcy, Cloudstrike, Izanagi's Burden, even Honed Edge Izanagi's Burden. Theoretically, Kinetic Tremor damage should be going up with the sniper rifle buff. We're going to wait and see though, and get those pre and post damage values, but keep in mind that Supremacy is already doing excellent damage with a combined DPS of 73,256 with Kinetic Tremors, with a total damage of 265,446. And you can also pair Kinetic Tremors with a perk like Rewind Rounds, which is going to refill your magazine when empty from reserves based on how many shots you land. Low-key, guys, Supremacy actually has solid DPS. So overall, guys, this may not seem like a massive buff on paper, but for weapons like Buzzard, it's pretty substantial, and it's going to raise its ease of use tremendously next season. I said previously in our Showrunner review that Kinetic Tremors on that SMG was the best bang for your buck out of all the weapons with Kinetic Tremors, even though it had less DPS than something like Buzzard. But next season, it's going to be hard to argue against Buzzard being the top dog when it comes to that Kinetic Tremor combination. For right now, I urge everyone to go to Zavala, turn in some of your Ingrams if you got any, and try to get yourself a good Buzzard with Kinetic Tremors for next season. At the same time, Bungie could just give us a craftable Kinetic Sidearm with Kinetic Tremors in Season the Wish, and then we'll be really cooking. Guys, if you enjoyed this video and these breakdowns, breakdowns. We do a number of them, just like this. We talk about the upcoming buffs to Vex Mythic class, the upcoming nerfs to Osteo Striga. We went over sniper rifles. If you want to check out any of those videos, you can click the card above or check out the description down below, as we'll have links to all of those. And again, if you like these videos, a like is very much appreciated. We'll be doing pre and post testing on all of these things. And with the dungeon launching just a mere 3 days after the launch of the season, we definitely want to know which weapons are feeling the best in the new meta. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.